I think for a lot of people, they have multiple touch points because when you first hear about Bitcoin, you just automatically assume it's not going to work. You're very skeptical, and rightfully so, right? This is your money
Yeah.
that you're talking about. So you want to be careful with how you invest in it and what your risk management tolerance is. And
Hmm.
I just thought there's no way this could work. It's going to be hacked. It's going to be shut down, and then you
Yeah.
have to take years of study to fully appreciate it. I think, but as we move forward in adoption, I think that there will be a generation of people who don't know exactly how mining works in the same way that I don't really know how my iPhone works and how that's built and designed, but yet I use it every single day. So I think it's going to be interesting. But I was curious to hear. I mean, what made you decide this is life changing, and I want to work in
Yeah.
this space. I want to invest in companies in this space. Why is Bitcoin life changing?
Yeah. I mean, look, again, so I give you a little bit of like my academic background. And one of the things when you write like long history papers or long investment memos, you understand uh, like footnotes and you understand history, how an idea evolves. And so for me, it was at the end of 18, early 19. I said to myself, the market had come off 80, 90% from the high in 17. And I thought, all right, it's now cheap. I'm also, I look at charts and I know prices and I know markets. And I thought, all right, I'm going to lock myself away in my office in my home in Greenwich and I'm not going to give up this time. And I spent 6 months, literally 10 hours a day, reading, listening to podcasts. And again, in 2019, the sort of academic, sort of intellectual backdrop in the space was much more developed than in 2014. In 14, you really only had like Antonopoulos and just a very few other guys like really explain things. And then later on, by 19, you had that wonderful Safedine Ammous book. You had that book, Jan Pritzker's book that I love, Inventing Bitcoin. And today there are now like 50 or 60 different books. And you can really, if you persist, you can get there. And so I persisted. And then what really struck me was that, first of all, that there had been 40 years of cryptographic and scientific research that had come before the publishing of the white paper. So I was just like, this Satoshi and some random guy put some paper out there and some coin. It never made sense. But then when I realized that there was a historical intellectual path, that this was not something out of nowhere, that gave me like real pause. I mean, in a positive way. I thought, wow, okay, maybe these 8 footnotes and how this thing actually works. It's more of an engineering paper. I was terrible at that, so I mean, it made it hard for me. The second thing was that when I realized, okay, that this was the result of many years of work, academic work, that the paper solved this problem that I'd never heard of, which is the Byzantine generals problem. Now, who walks around, and says, "Oh yeah, I know the Byzantine generals problem"? I mean, no
Right.
one has heard of this. It's ridiculous. And so I was like, "Oh, this is a problem that people have been trying to solve for hundreds of years or whatever it is." And I didn't know that. And wait a second, this 8-page paper solves the Byzantine generals problem. Problem of distributed trust. How do you trust another counterparty without an intermediary, right? How do you send value to another counterparty without an intermediary? So I had no idea that this was anything. Like, I just didn't even know that it existed, this problem. So then I thought, wow, like this solves a problem that math geniuses sitting around doing their PhDs have never been able to figure out. And this guy, he figures out the problem and he just gives it to the world for free. And that was also another thing that was hard to understand or hard to believe in, because people want to patent things right away, and it just was so out of the ordinary. And then I saw the power of this distributed network and the value of a network that was decentralized truly and was completely global, right? And there was nobody controlling it. And I just thought, everything of value will eventually be put on this network. We have achieved network effect, and I think have demonstrated Metcalfe's law. And there might be other ones. I mean, I love the fact that Bitcoin is proof of work. So for me, proof of work is like the most hardcore, the greatest invention. I mean,
Yeah.
the way that electricity in our world can secure things in the digital world it's like mind blowing. I was blown away by that. Like how he bridged the real world to this
Hmm.
digital sphere.
Right.
And I mean, that's just genius. I don't think there's been anything like that in finance. You know, the Black-Scholes model. I mean, who cares about that? That's just an option pricing model. People, consider that one of the great financial, innovations. There are lots of different option pricing models. So like, this is infinitely more important than something like Black-Scholes. And Black-Scholes is, given, I don't know, credit as being something like landmark. There's nothing like this. And the thing what's really interesting is that there's so many people of that very high caliber of intellect that don't get this.
Hmm.
They don't do the work. They don't, and so, but then they're like average people who kind of get it, and it's just incredible. Like you were probably 10 years ago not involved. I don't know what you did before this, but probably not in finance, right? I don't know.
No,
And
I was in journalism. I was a mainstream news reporter covering everything from city hall meetings to natural disasters and corrupt politicians and all that. I was looking for Bitcoin and didn't know it.
yeah, I think that's the way we all end up, feeling about it in some way. Like and then you just keep wondering every day, like why like aren't more people getting it? And just those things that I described, they're hard to understand, right?
Can you talk a little bit more before we wrap up about that $10 trillion market cap and how you see Bitcoin actually reaching that? Do you think it'll happen in the next couple
Yeah.
of years?
Well, you know, I wanted to have the name of a fund that I was pretty sure I was going to be right on. So that wasn't necessarily my view. I said, look, a 30x return in the traditional world, no one makes 30x on anything in the public markets. I mean, the markets that trade. So I thought that was enough. But the reality is, yeah, if there's 500 trillion of total wealth or whatever the number is, um, even 5% is 25 trillion. There are a lot of assets like real estate people invest in often as a store of value. Art, paintings, store of value. I mean, Bitcoin could really take a chunk of that store of value capital that's out there, right? People own equity also because it's a hedge against that inflation, right? So if you think of all the assets that people own just because they want to keep up with inflation, you could have a big chunk of that go to Bitcoin. I just don't think it happens that quickly. And, we have several hundred investors in the fund and they're from all around the world. And I've talked to, over 1,000 investors, potential investor meetings, et cetera. And, I hear firsthand the resistance from people who you might not think would be resistant, even now. And so I just think it takes longer. I think this next bull run into 2025, we'll see Bitcoin over 100,000. I think that's a pretty conservative estimate. My target for when I first started looking at this deeply in 19 was always around 250 to 350,000 on Bitcoin. That was just a number that, that was to me a reasonable number to get to by 2029. So in 2019, that was sort of my thought. By the end of the decade, that's a reasonable number to get to. But I think Kathy has come out and said, Kathy Wood, did she say a million? A million? And
Mm-hmm.
I can get to those
Over a
numbers
million.
too. Yeah, based on, but that might be, maybe it's 2035 or 2038. I mean, I don't know. Or it could be earlier. This is one of those things where, um, you know, Bitcoin is the greatest performing asset of all time. And it's been up over 200% annualized. However, it comes with 7 drawdowns of 60 to 70% or more.